The folding table at the laundromat has a wobble on the left leg. You know this because you're the one who fixes it once a month on a Sunday when the place is slow. The two employees who work the counter call you Dave. They think you're a part-time contractor the owner hired to handle inventory checks, restocking detergent, counting quarters, making sure the dryers on the end aren't running hot. You wear a gray t-shirt with a faded logo from a hardware store that closed 6 years ago. Nobody looks twice at a man counting quarters. You own the building. You own the laundromat inside it. You own the parking lot next door that a taco truck rents from you every weekday for $600 a month, cash, handed to you personally, because the owner doesn't know your last name either. Dave doesn't cash checks. Dave doesn't need to. Here's the thing nobody tells you about money like this. It doesn't start with a plan. It starts with panic. 11 years ago, you were 24, and a warehouse in the industrial part of town laid off 40% of its floor staff on a Tuesday morning with a 2-week severance check and a pamphlet about unemployment benefits. You were one of the 40%. You spent 9 days sending out resumes into a silence so complete it felt personal. On day 10, you found a Craigslist listing at 1 a.m. that you almost scrolled past. Vending route, 14 machines, must sell, moving out of state, $1,900 OBO. You didn't have a business plan. You had $2,300 in a checking account and a fear of going back to filling out applications that felt worse than any risk the vending machines could possibly carry. You met the seller in a gas station parking lot. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He wasn't negotiating because he was smart. He was negotiating because he wanted it gone. You paid him $1,900 in cash you'd pulled from 3 different ATMs so the withdrawal wouldn't flag anything at the bank. He handed you a set of keys, a route list handwritten on notebook paper, and 14 machines you'd never seen. You drove to the first one that same afternoon, a break room in a tire shop. The machine had $38 in quarters inside it and a bag of chips stuck in the coil. You freed the chips with a coat hanger, standing in a stranger's break room, feeling like an idiot and something else underneath the idiot feeling, something closer to alive. That machine taught you the only lesson that has ever mattered. Not the tire shop machine specifically, the pattern it revealed. A friend from the warehouse told you around that time about a stock tip, something that could double in 6 months if it hit. Maybe it would have. You didn't have the stomach or the capital to find out. What you had was 14 machines making, on average, $40 a week each, whether you were paying attention or not, whether the market was up or down, whether anyone believed in you or didn't. Cash flow doesn't need to be believed in. It just needs to be collected. You started asking a different question about every dollar after that. Not how much could this become, but what does this pay me while I sleep? That question built everything that came next. The years that followed had no headline moments. A coin-op car wash bought from a man retiring to Arizona, purchased for less than his asking price because you were the only one who showed up with an actual offer instead of a maybe. A half-acre of self-storage units picked up through a probate sale nobody else in the county bothered to bid on because the family selling it just wanted the estate closed before the holidays. A 6-unit apartment building from a landlord in his 70s who told you over coffee he insisted on paying for, that he was tired of getting calls about broken garbage disposals at 11 at night. You bought it in 4 weeks. You still get those calls. You just don't mind them the way he did. None of it was discussed at dinner. None of it appeared in a conversation with a coworker, a cousin, a college friend. The habit of silence that started as embarrassment in your 20s calcified over time into something closer to a professional discipline. You got good at being underestimated, and then you got good at using it. The car helps, a 2014 Honda Civic with a crack in the windshield shaped like a lightning bolt that you've had inspected twice and been told twice that it's fine to leave. You leave it. The wardrobe helps too. 3 nearly identical gray t-shirts, work pants, boots that have never once been near office. You pay cash for lunch every time, not because you're hiding from the IRS, but because a debit card creates a paper trail of a life that doesn't match the one people assume you're living. At a barbecue last summer, a man who runs a mid-sized logistics company, 3 drinks in, offered you a starter position, loading trucks on weekends. He meant it kindly. He thought he was doing you a favor. You said you'd think about it. You have 11 employees on payroll across 4 businesses, and not one of them thinks you're the guy signing their checks. The disguise held for years. Then, on a Thursday in March, it almost didn't.
You were walking out of a private wealth management office downtown, a quarterly meeting about a trust restructuring that took 40 minutes and a signature, when someone said your name. Not Dave, your actual name. You turned, and it was a woman from your graduating class, someone you hadn't spoken to in 9 years, standing on the sidewalk with a coffee in her hand and genuine confusion on her face, because the building behind you doesn't do walk-ins, and everyone who walks out of it looks like they have somewhere expensive to be. You said you were helping a friend with some paperwork. It came out smooth, almost too smooth, the way a lie does when you've had practice you didn't ask for. She nodded. She didn't push. You talked for 2 minutes about nothing, her kids, the old professor you both hated, the weather, and then she said it was good to see you and walked toward the parking garage. You stood on that sidewalk for a moment after she left, not because you were worried she'd figure it out. She wouldn't. Nobody ever does, because nobody's looking. What stayed with you wasn't the risk of exposure. It was the cost of the lie itself, small, practiced, effortless, and still somehow a little more weight added to a room in your life that gets a little more sealed off every time you have to protect it. You got in the Civic. The crack in the windshield caught the afternoon light exactly the way it always does. You drove to the laundromat because it was a Sunday and the folding table needed fixing again, and Dave had work to do. Your barber's name is Sal. He's cut your hair every 3 weeks for 6 years, in a shop with 4 chairs and a radio permanently tuned to a sports station nobody in the room is actually listening to. Sal has never asked what you do. Not once in 6 years has he asked the question every other barber asks by the second visit. You've thought about why. You think it's because Sal watches hands. Cleaning company owners, landlords, guys who fix their own plumbing, their hands look a certain way, calloused in specific places, nails cut short and practical. Sal looked at your hands the first time you sat in his chair and drew some conclusion he's never said out loud, and he's been quietly and permanently correct about something he's never confirmed. Last winter, you came in on a Tuesday looking like you hadn't slept, because you hadn't. A burst pipe at 3 a.m. in one of the apartment buildings, 4 units flooded, a night of phone calls, and a plumber you'd had to talk down from an emergency rate. Sal didn't ask why you looked like that either. He just cut your hair a little slower than usual, and when you stood up to pay, he waved off the tip, which he has never done before or since. He said, "Rough week, take it easy." That was the whole exchange. You've had people who know your exact net worth to the dollar tell you things that meant less than that sentence from a man who thinks you might work in facilities management. That kind of respect doesn't come from being impressed. It comes from being seen doing the actual work week after week without performance attached to it. You've never told anyone that Sal is one of maybe 3 people whose opinion of you actually moves something in your chest. You never will. That's not a strategy either. Some things just stay where they are. The person you protect hardest from the truth is your younger brother Danny. He's 31, works retail management, and has been underwater on a used car loan and a maxed card for going on 2 years, in the quiet, grinding way that doesn't make headlines, just makes someone tired in a specific spot behind the eyes. Last spring, he called you about a $4,200 medical bill from an ER visit. Nothing catastrophic, just an infection that scared him at 2 a.m., but the bill landed like a brick regardless. He asked if you could float him $500 toward it. You said sure.
What you actually did was call the hospital's billing department yourself the next morning under a name that wasn't yours and paid the entire balance through a small nonprofit fund you'd quietly set up 2 years earlier for exactly this kind of situation, a fund that, on paper, exists to help local families with unexpected medical costs and has helped exactly one family, which is Danny's, every time, without him knowing it's you. He called you a month later, relieved, half laughing, saying some charity thing had wiped the bill, and he still didn't fully understand how. You said that was great news. You meant it. You've thought about telling him the truth more than once, usually late at night, usually after a call like that one. You don't, because you know Danny. You know that the version of himself he's building, the one who's climbing out slowly on his own terms, would collapse a little if he found out the ground had been rigged the whole time. He needs to believe he's doing this himself, so you let him believe it, and you carry the actual weight quietly. And that arrangement, as unfair as it sometimes feels, is the kindest thing you know how to do for him.
The temptation that almost broke the whole structure came from a friend of a friend at a fundraising dinner you only attended because you owed someone a favor. A regional business journal was putting together a list, under 40 real estate and small business leaders, profiles, headshots, a gala dinner in the fall. Someone had put your name forward without asking. The woman running it pulled you aside near the bar and told you with real enthusiasm that you'd be a perfect fit, that people needed to hear a story like yours. For about 4 days you let yourself imagine it. Not the money, the moment. Your name in print, Danny seeing it, Sal seeing it. The satisfaction, finally, of being known for what you'd actually built instead of what people assumed about a guy in a cracked-windshield Civic. It felt good in exactly the way you'd trained yourself for years not to want. You turned it down with an email that took longer to write than it should have, citing a preference for privacy that was true but incomplete. The real reason was simpler and colder. A profile like that doesn't stay contained. It gets your name attached to your holdings attached to your tenants attached to your barber attached to a version of you that Sal would suddenly have to reconcile with the guy who never asked for a tip discount. Privacy wasn't costing you anything. Exposure would have cost you the only thing you'd actually built that mattered: the specific, ordinary trust of people who liked you before they had any reason to. The number itself arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in October, while you were standing in the plumbing aisle of a hardware store holding 2 nearly identical compression fittings, trying to figure out which one fit a faucet in your own apartment. Your accountant's email came in with the subject line, Q3 Reconciliation. You read it standing there, a man in a paint-stained sweatshirt squeezing past you toward the pipe fittings. $650 million in total asset value. You put both fittings back, found an employee, asked which one you actually needed, and went to the register. You drove home and fixed the faucet. It leaked slightly the next morning. You fixed that too. There was no adrenaline. What you felt was closer to the quiet that comes when a long equation finally balances. Not celebration, just resolution. You thought briefly about a 24-year-old in a gas station parking lot handing over $1,900 in cash for 14 vending machines because the alternative was another silent week of job applications. He wouldn't have believed this number. He wouldn't have known what to do with it. You're not sure you fully do either, which might be the most honest thing about the whole story. By evening, the notebook was already open on your kitchen table, a new name at the top of a fresh page, a 71-year-old man named Walt, who's run a regional HVAC supply company for over 3 decades and mentioned in an offhand comment at a trade counter you happened to be standing in that his son wants nothing to do with the business. You wrote 3 questions under his name. You'll call in a month, not this week. You don't want to look like a man who overheard something and rushed. There are 9 other names below his. The list never gets shorter. It just gets quieter, more patient, more deliberate, one conversation at a time.
Sunday morning, the laundromat. The folding table still has its wobble. You never actually fixed the leg properly, just shimmed it, the way you shim most things you'd rather manage than solve completely. The two counter employees say good morning to Dave. One of them asks if you can look at a dryer that's been running hot on the end unit. You say you'll take a look after you finish the inventory count. You think for a second about the 24-year-old with the coat hanger and the stuck bag of chips, standing in a stranger's break room feeling like an idiot. He never got applause. He never needed it. Every boring Sunday, every quiet phone call, every bill nobody knew you paid, every profile you didn't accept, every dollar that went back into something instead of out to prove a point, none of it was ever waiting on anyone else's recognition to be real. You fix the dryer. It takes 11 minutes. You finish the inventory count, wave to the counter guys, and walk out into an ordinary Sunday that nobody watching would look at twice. That's enough. That's more than enough.